Welcome to CXO Spotlight. I'm Chirag Khanijo, your co-host. And today's guest is Andreu, CEO of Constella Intelligence, a 4 times Chief Information Security Officer, and the author of the Ciso Playbook. He sits on 230 billion identity records, the world's largest breach data set. He has been on both sides, built wiretap systems for the DEA, defended enterprises as a Ciso at Hearst and 2U, and now runs the company that sees every exposed credential before attackers weaponize it. He just published his 2026 cybersecurity predictions, and they're not just generic trend watching. They're coming from someone watching artificial adversaries move from proof of concept to daily reality. And that's what we are here to discuss today. Welcome, Andrew. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, Andrew, to begin with, walk me through that journey of DEA sort of building the wiretap systems to defending as the Chief Information Security Officer 4 times to now running the company with the world's largest breach data set. How did that position you to see what a lot of other people miss?
So my DEA days obviously taught me a lot, and I'm certainly thankful for those years. But one of the biggest elements that I walked away with was that sense of mission, because I feel a lot of people in the enterprise space, it's kind of, it's a job, they do it for a paycheck, whatever, but that sense of mission is lacking in some cases. Unfortunately, I think in most cases. But for me, it was instilled early in my career. And I've been able to take that across my journey, founding a company, enterprise world, private, public companies. So to me, that's been the key element, that sense of mission. And I embrace it. I think it's a tremendously strong driving force.
Yeah. And I read somewhere, I think it's relevant to your mission. In your 2025 report, you said that there were 107 billion records exposed in 2024, around 4.3 billion email addresses, if I'm not wrong. That's like a 58% increase year over year. Can you look at this data? What pattern keeps showing up that you even mentioned in your report?
So, what's interesting now is that, to me, facilitation and scale have become true factors in terms of what we're up against from a cybercrime perspective, from an adversarial perspective. And so from a facilitation perspective, what you see now, and I don't want to harp on the whole AI concept, but it's just, there's a real dynamic there. AI technologies have been true facilitators to lower the barrier of entry into cybercrime, for instance. And then for those that were already in cybercrime, it has facilitated a different level of quality and scope. And then you introduce the scale factor. All of a sudden, again, using similar technologies, AI technologies, you can now scale your campaigns, or they can, on a level that's unprecedented. And so I think those are two very real factors that we have to contend with as things move forward.
And I think we should double click on that because people do not understand the depth of what you're talking about. It looks at very surface level. In your 2026 predictions, you use this term called artificial adversaries. That's not just AI-powered attacks.
Nope.
What's the actual difference? Can you explain that?
Absolutely. And by the way, my new book that's about to come out is literally based on exactly this. It's the adversarial mindset. And as a defender, if you cannot embrace and simulate that mindset, you're at a disadvantage. So the point here is, if you take that mindset, the human factor, and couple it with these AI technologies, all of a sudden, what I call the artificial adversary becomes a really true force to deal with, because this person can do things that 2 years ago they could not do. So, for example, I just spoke about this at the Javits Center at the AI Summit in New York, and I showed real examples of how, with 2 simple prompts, I could generate an entire ransomware campaign, source code and everything included, with 2 simple prompts. And so there's no knowledge that's necessary anymore, right? The knowledge comes into how to deploy, how to get somebody to click on something or whatever, right? The social engineering or the vibe hacking component. But that's more of a human dynamic. The technical dynamics behind these campaigns, are now, I hate to say it, but they're so easy to achieve. It's almost disturbing.
And so let's talk about a story I did read about this, the Know Before, a security training company that hired someone and it turned out to be a North Korean operative, I think, started downloading and hacking tools within days. And then they caught him. But a lot of enterprises would not do that, right? Would not be able to do that. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah. And without getting into names, I did work at an enterprise where we had 4 cases while I was there, 4 cases of fraudulent IT workers. A lot of, I think genuinely it comes down to a fundamental human factor that you try to believe in the good of people. I think most people, that statement applies to most people. Most of us are not cynical by nature like me. My career has made me distrustful of many things. And so when, for instance, an HR or a hiring manager wants to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, and let's say they don't come on camera for interviews or for meetings or whatever, they just kind of leave it alone and it's okay. But it's not okay because they're using that to play on your emotions to get away with what they're doing. And so we have to, we're at a point where digital trust has eroded to really a sad level. Let's call it that. Yeah. And so we have to be cynical whenever we approach any piece of digital content, because if you factor in synthetic IT workers, deep fakes, vibe hacking, all those things, all of a sudden you just don't know what's real and what's not. And so you have to have like off-channel capabilities to verify somebody's existence, the request they're making of you. It's so funny how circular things are. What used to be the only way, which is me picking up a phone and saying, hey, is this really you? We've gone back to that being the only way to verify that it's you.
Yeah.
Right.
And that scares me a little bit, but that also means that this sort of zero trust jargon that we used to use only for the CISO's world has gone out of their world, is applied to HR, is applied to sales, is applied to all other divisions. And that is almost very resonant with your prediction of identity becomes the primary blast radius in 2026. What does that mean? If you can explain it for a lot of listeners,
Sure. I mean, if you take a step back and think of pretty much any web application or any enterprise application that exists, they all have some type of authentication in place. Mm-hmm. And an attacker's challenge is to beat that authentication. Okay. Mm-hmm. If I beat that authentication, that means I can become you. I can hijack your identity, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what used to be, let's say, a brute force style attack that worked some time ago, right? Then we came, look, security is a game of whack-a-mole to a large extent. So brute force came in, we came up with MFA, captchas, all those things. And, fast forward to now, we have info stealers. And info stealers are fascinating because one of the elements of data that they extract or exfiltrate from a machine are active session objects. So that means I don't even need your username and password. I can take your session object and replay it through a browser and I'm you. So identity is that new perimeter or whatever you want to call it, because it is now, I don't want to say easy, but it's far more seamless than ever for me to become someone else on an application. And so the stakes have changed dramatically because now it's not a matter of me breaking in. Now it's just a matter of me finding the right creds or a session object and walking right in. So, that's the thesis behind that statement.
And I think you've used this term a couple of times just now, which is vibe hacking. I think a lot of us have heard a lot about vibe coding, but can you explain a bit about vibe hacking, how somebody can use this?
Yeah. So it's like social engineering on steroids. So a lot of nefarious actors, believe it or not, understand human psychology at a very deep level. And once you start understanding what makes a human click, tick, whatever, you can use that against them. So, for example, the whole point of vibe hacking is me changing your state of being, the way you feel, into taking action that you would normally not take. So, for example, it could be I put pressure on you with the fear of missing out. I put pressure on you with the fear of getting fired. I put pressure on, right? And it goes back to, growing up in New York City as a kid, you think back to the 70s and the 80s, the pickpockets of those days never worked alone. They always had somebody that would walk up to you and distract you with conversation while somebody came behind you and picked your pocket and took off.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to that, except digitally now, right? So imagine an AI bot, an AI engine that can monitor your activity, what you're typing, right? It could do sentiment analysis on what you're typing and realize, hey, this guy's upset today. Let me make him feel better. All of a sudden, you feel better and you start flowing into that conversation that they want you to partake in, and they steer you towards the action. That's vibe hacking.
Wow, this is scary. And if we in enterprise tech who are not purely in the cybersecurity space find this challenging, and we're supposed to understand this space now because it affects us, every one of us, not just the cybersecurity, right? How are enterprise CISOs supposed to budget for defense against AI adversaries that are scaling attacks at machine speed with almost like, if I have to believe, like five hacking, it's like zero marginal cost per attempt, right?
Oh, yeah.
So how are they supposed to budget for these things now?
I think there's two main dimensions. I think that what has been invested in terms of, I'll call it situational awareness training, right? Email phishing training and all those kind of simulations. I think that needs to be taken to another level. I think that has to be combined with red teaming to make a more realistic experience, not just, oh my God, I can see that this email came from a domain that it shouldn't have come from, right? Like those days are gone. That was 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And so getting your users to become what I call healthily paranoid, unfortunately, is just reality these days. And if your users are not paranoid, they're going to get caught by some of these nets that attackers are throwing out there. The other dimension is, as a CISO, I think is truly understanding what sets of adversaries would be interested in my organization. Because this is critical. And I think this is one of the biggest missing pieces in the industry. We, as an industry, get taught, hey, whatever the analysts from group X say, you got to listen to them and act on that, right? That's incorrect to me because they don't understand my environment. They're making generic predictions based on analysis of data sets. Nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't mean, for instance, if I make lollipops in a manufacturing environment, why would a nation state be interested in my organization? I realize that's a bad example, but it's an example. My point is, understand who of the nefarious actors out there would really be interested in your organization. And it almost, if you use things like MITRE ATT&CK and you understand TTPs and stuff, and you can model threats against your organization, you start seeing, oh, there's a higher likelihood of this group coming at me instead of that group. So you start building your protections against statistically what is more likely to come after you, what's more likely to happen to your organization.
I love this because I think there are three factors which are always at play in a CISO's mind, and they're like context. Why would an attack come to us, and what would be their purpose? Like you said, this is very relevant. But then there is scale and speed as well, right? And one of your predictions that hit me the hardest was that assume continuous machine speed contact with the adversary, which means that most CISOs till 2024 or even till today are still thinking of human attacker timelines. But what breaks when attackers move at machine speed? My thought is that my infrastructure is ready. I have prepared for endpoint security. I have prepared for perimeter security, the threat vectors. I have prepared for, a couple of things that you spoke about. Now I'm thinking about SaaS level security because I'm exposed at different levels now, right? And I don't control every level. But if the attacks are happening at machine speed, I want you to run a scenario what all could break because of the speed that is happening.
Yeah. Before the scenario, I'll tell you, it forces a shift in mindset to not be protective, but be resilient. Imagine scenarios where, let's just be honest, no matter what you've put in place, you cannot withstand a certain type of attack. So you have to have resilience within your ecosystem such that you can withstand. You may not protect against it, but you can withstand the attack and continue business operations. And so I think shifting that mindset into that of resilience is absolutely critical. But one of the things you need to, as a CISO, you need to start looking at, and I think this is kind of a, I don't want to sound judgmental, but it is a little bit of a black box in a lot of scenarios when I talk to CISOs. They don't really understand their environments. They understand the pieces of their environments that make sense to them. Give you a perfect example. If you're a compliance CISO, there's different type of CISOs. If you're a compliance CISO and your focus is GRC, policy, and all this and that, and I come in and I tell you, hey, have you taken a look at your API ecosystem? They kind of look at you like, what is that? And you go, oh, good God. Because all of a sudden now you realize what is traditionally a black box to the whole industry, APIs, is more so to you, this compliance CISO, than anyone else, because you don't even realize what you have in your environment. Because the first question they should have asked is, let me see my API inventory. Are they all REST? Are they, legacy SOAP, right? Questions that show me that you understand the API ecosystem. Most people do not. And if you look at a lot of attacks, especially APTs, there's not always, a lot of times there have been API components that have made up parts of that entire campaign. One of the reasons is this. I bet you any environment right now that can detect a brute force attack against a web application form, a login form, cannot detect the same against an API. So you can bang away at APIs all you want, and there's probably very little monitoring and very little protection on the API front. And so you locked your front door, but you left your window open, right? And so I think trying to legitimately understand the breadth and the depth of your ecosystem, really of your attack surface, that is absolutely critical. And this pushes into understanding your attack surface from the outside in and from the inside out. Because, for example, you may have a series of APIs that you're hosting that are not world-facing. So you assume they're protected, but they're not protected against somebody on the inside.
Yes.
If somebody in the inside knows how to talk to those APIs, all of a sudden, there's an attack vector that you didn't even factor in because you assumed outside in is the only thing I should be concerned about. Those type of misconceptions are rampant in this industry.
That I'm very curious, since we spoke about so many different kinds of attack, the context, the speed, and the APIs, right? In your opinion, having observed this industry for so long and being a part of it, what scares you the most in terms of attack? Like, what should, as we go into this AI era where we are headfirst jumping into this and then putting governance in place, what's your fear in terms of highest risk factor that exists today for all CISOs?
I'm going to speak personally. What scares me, because I've seen it firsthand, is how seamless it is to now create and automate an end-to-end campaign. What used to take a skilled attacker months to plan, do recon, it is now disturbingly simple, disturbingly quick. So, for example, if I wanted to do something simple in the recon stage of whatever, port scanning your environment, I don't even need to know how to run Nmap anymore. I could just prompt an engine to do it for me. And when you watch what these engines do and they do it dynamically, it is fascinating because I always think, okay, if I was doing it manually, what would that look like, right? You got to run the whole scan, look at the results, analyze them, go, oh, I should have done this differently, rerun the whole scan, right? These engines are adaptable. They're fascinating. And so the fact that a non-skilled attacker can do that against my environment scares me.
Wow. So, of course, when you are scared and have fear of something, you think about what's my leverage or what's my coverage. And you had some prediction on cyber insurance that caught my attention. Carriers will demand like proof of functioning CTEM programs or
Yep.
identity-centric controls, not just like questionnaires and things like that we spoke about earlier. So what happens to the CISOs that can't show the proof? Because ultimately, it's almost always after the fact check or audit of what went wrong. That
Right.
happens most of the time, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think to those CISOs, they're either not going to get covered or their premiums are going to be through the roof. It's going to be one of the two. But if you think of a convergence, if you will, of some of the GRC elements that we're aware of and these cyber insurance questionnaires, The cyber assurance questionnaires are generally static. They don't require evidence. They just require you to answer questions. Historically, I think now they're starting to get hip to the game that you can answer whatever you want on my questionnaire. That doesn't mean that it's the truth or that it's accurate. So now it's more like, well, show me proof. And now all of a sudden, this is one of my kind of silent predictions, even the days of showing proofs with screenshots, those are ending. Because let's be honest, I can go to ChatGPT right now and generate screenshots for you. How do you know that they're real from my environment, right? You can't trust anything these days. So now an insurance carrier could very well send in a qualified auditor or analyst to sit down next to you, and you have to show them live on a working system that you have, control X in place. That's going to be a game changer because that has not existed to current state. Right? Insurers have gone off of questionnaires and they take your word for it. If an insurer has to pay enough policy payouts, they're gonna want more proof. Think about it. They're in the business of making money, not paying money.
Absolutely. Just like any other insurance company over the period of years have started putting trackers in cars, things at home and, homeowners approval or things like that.
Yeah.
More validation on validation, right?
Yeah. Or annual blood tests for a human, right? As you get life insurance, right? As you get older, they want proof of the fact that your blood numbers aren't dipping down or raising up, whatever, right? The point is you're at a steady state. Like I said, insurance companies are in it to make money. So they're going to want the most validation of the data points that you're providing.
Yeah. All right. So I think for good or bad, we have done a lot of fear mongering, which is the reality of which is the reality of what's coming in 2026 and 27. Artificial adversaries, machine speed attack, identity as the blast radius, APIs, so many things we discussed. And in fact, the most scary is the ability or the ease of ability for anybody to be able to execute that's what I take away from this, and the risk at the CISO's job and overall organization, right? That we spoke about. But let's get tactical on what should people actually do about it, right? Like, how can we protect ourselves from this? So you yourself have been a chief information security officer like 4 times. You're now sitting on this 230 billion identity records showing exactly how organizations get breached. Given everything we just discussed, all these things, what questions CISOs are not asking today that they should be asking if they want to be ready for 2026?
I'm going to go back to the lack of understanding of what makes up their attack surface. I think that is fundamentally one of the biggest flaws in this industry. And even the CISOs that have invested in attack surface management, it is generally external attack surface management, outside in. They don't understand their ecosystem entirely. I'll give you an example. I was helping out an organization. I was not the CISO there. I was helping the CISO out because they asked me for help. I walk into this building, beautiful building, New York City. CISO's showing me everything that they have. I said, let's go down to the basement. I said, call your maintenance guys. We got into the basement, brought the maintenance team in. I said, the HVAC system, how does that get administered? Oh, these guys log in. So somebody remote logs in. That thing is on your network, yes? They're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, oh, we see. So I asked the CISO, how do you protect? He's like, I didn't even realize they did that. So you because it goes back to my earlier point. It's not judgmental. He focused on what made sense to him, what he was aware of. He never had to deal with ICS, OT, or SCADA systems. So he never thought that's part of my attack surface. But it is. This is your building. This is where your company operates. You got this stuff right in your basement, right under your nose. And then I asked, what if remote connectivity's out? Well, the maintenance guy comes in with a laptop and he plugs in. What does he plug into? Shows me the port. I'm like, he's on your network.
Yes, yeah.
Right? So that's an example of the inside out. Now you literally walked through the front door. You bypassed all of my perimeter protections and you're inside my environment. I don't know you. And so I think that having that understanding at some level of depth, I'm not saying you have to be an expert, right? You don't have to go be able to write APIs, even though that's cool. But, you have to have some level of understanding of everything that makes up your ecosystem. And For example, you talk to a CISO about asset inventory. They're very quick to point out laptops, desktops, servers. Is this software an asset? Is it an API an asset? Right?
Yes.
Identity's an asset. A non-human identity's an asset. So all of a sudden, your definition of asset, in my opinion, was very limited. If you expand the scope of what defines an asset and you go protect your assets, you have a very different set of challenges.
Yeah.
So they stick to what makes sense to them. The laptop, desktop, and servers, they understand that because they've been doing that for 20 years. They haven't been doing identity for 20 years. They haven't been doing non-human identity for 20 years. And now you look at non-human identity with the scope of decentralized, forget about agentic AI, decentralized agentic AI. That is, I mean, the only thing I could say is wow, because the possibilities from a tech perspective that come into play from a decentralized model are just fascinating. It's awesome, but it's also highly risky, right?
Yeah.
And so if you don't understand what it is you're trying to protect, see, because so many CISOs have been removed, far removed in some cases from the tech, that they've kind of lost that original DNA of what made up a CISO back in the early 2000s when I first moved into the corporate space. Back then, you had to know your stuff because the tooling wasn't there. You had to know your stuff because otherwise you couldn't protect anything. You had to know your stuff. Now you don't have to. Now it's, board meetings and writing policies and, whatever, relationship building. That's all part of it. But to me, that's not the whole game. And I think most CISOs that I know operate up there and they've lost touch with down here.
So let's say I want to get in touch with that part where I'm fully secured, right? I got the first point, and I think it's loud and clear that I need to understand my surface really well, whether it's the hardware, the facilities, and applications or software and network and everything, right? In fact, I think it goes, this point has many subsidiaries or corollaries to that, because even within applications, is it a platform as a service, software as a service?
Right.
Because shared responsibility has made this even crazier.
Sure.
Who manages the data, how much of it is shared, and things like that. Step one, done. 2026, this is what we're going to do. We're going to spend deep effort, not just a software scanning effort of our platform, and take an inventory of that. What could be another few steps that they can take to get their posture way better with a small effort?
So for each one of those spaces, let's go with APIs for now as the example. Understanding the posture at a per API level. See, here's what happens. Over, let's say, the span of 10 years, software engineering team has changed 3 times. That affects what's been, what code has been written. And that affects what security has been implemented into a set of APIs, right? So you have to understand what posture exists today and can it be improved. The likelihood of something being created to be functional and most secure is very low.
Yeah.
The likelihood that something got functional and low security is very high.
Very high, yes.
That's the unfortunate reality of our industry. And so if you go into understanding as best you can your ecosystem and go in with that understanding, you assume the worst and then validate it with some posture management, right? There's plenty of posture management tools out there. And then you could put together a sensible game plan for your environment, not what some analyst generically said, for your environment. So for example, on the API example, let's say you realize you're a REST shop, REST APIs, and you use JWT tokens, yes? And you go, okay, can we make this better? And somebody says, yes, we can implement payload encryption with JWE. Beautiful. That to me is a very sensible analysis of the situation. Can we do better? And getting an answer from one of your experts. Yes, JWE is an option. You perform, your key pair exchanges with your customers, your clients, and all of a sudden you raise the security bar way high by asking the right question and taking an action. That to me is a classic example of a CISO understanding a space, not at depth, just enough to ask the right question, get an answer, and put something in motion to create an improvement.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And I think that is also very low effort. It's not incredible effort and a whole project in itself.
You would be surprised at how many things you can do to improve security that are not rocket science.
Yeah.
The problem is nobody wants to be held accountable if something breaks. And as the CISO, you got to be willing to have that accountability put on you. Well, let's just be honest. Not everybody's wired the same way, right? So some CISOs, they don't want to lose their jobs, so they won't take chances.
Yeah. So please go ahead.
Just another quick example. For instance, let's say you have a host opened up for a remote access via SSH. Okay, SSH is awesome. Yes, but SSH can be improved. So you say, okay, what if we only allow key-based SSH? Forget about username and password because that's susceptible to brute force. We do key-based, which means we have to do a key exchange, through some offline channel with every entity that's going to come into our environment. Is it a level of effort? Yeah. Is it tremendous? No. But how many organizations actually do that? Not many. And key-based is way more secure for SSH than username and password. So that small level of effort, just by understanding how I can improve SSH, that's another example of how you can raise the bar.
Yeah. I think interestingly, and I want to cut some CISOs some slack as well, in the sense that, yes, a lot of these are very intelligent and simple options that you said, right? But your ability of being on both the sides also empowers you, that you as a company who works in this field, you have tremendous experience in executing it for a lot of people, right? Whereas somebody who's only been a CISO seat is looking at it from their perspective for most of the times, right? And that's why they have partners, they have vendors that can help them with this, right? That can support them this. That's why you call them partners, right? Not just vendors. So let's talk about this. A CISO is evaluating identity security vendors or partners, right? Threat intelligence platforms. Everyone is claiming similar capabilities given what's coming in 2026. How should they evaluate? What should they look for that separate the real capability from just marketing? What do you think?
I think that starting to merge the worlds of doing POCs with products and red teaming your environment, merging those two worlds starts to paint a different picture for you. Because now I'm not just looking at a POC from a product to say that it works. Now I'm going to say, well, it works in my environment, but it also stood up to this red team that I just put it through. Not a pen test, a red team exercise. There's a big difference. If you start to merge those worlds, you start to get a far more real sense of whether this product is going to really hold up in my environment and is going to hold up to attacks. Now, I will say, not all red teams are created equal. So finding competent red teamers is critical. But if you find them, use them wisely and effectively, because they will get you the closest you could ever get to a real attack. Because red teamers, like I said, they're not pen testers only. Red teamers think like the bad guys, and they can legitimately simulate what those bad guys would. It's like I always use this analogy. If I wanted to put an alarm system in my home, I'm not going to call a cop to tell me where to put my alarm system. I'm going to call a burglar, because the burglar is going to look at my home and go, yeah, this is how I would break in. That's what I want to know. Because the cop is going to think by the rules, because that's what they're trained to do, right? Your vendors are going to come in. They want to play by rules because their products can't solve everything. You bring in that red team, that burglar, and they start telling you, yeah, this product is really good at this, but it sucks at that, right? And then you get a very different perspective. And I think the unionization of those kind of efforts, and it takes a little work, but that unionization yields a lot of insight.
So I'm going to put you on a spot for a second. Okay. You spoke about how CISOs should evaluate vendors. Okay. And Constella Intelligence is in that space. Identity, security, threat intelligence. What's unique combination at Constella that you believe differentiates you in a way that makes a CISO choose you? I'm not asking for a pitch. I'm asking what you genuinely believe is that sharp edge you have that survives, that question or the scrutiny from the CISO when they have asked like what you just laid out 2 minutes back.
I would say that our edge is our data. And so first of all, our data lake has been amassed over 16, 17, maybe even 18 years at this point. So the data goes back a long way, and there's value to that time series factor of data. Then our breach hunting program, which is to a large percentage automated at this point, runs 24/7. So we are constantly getting fresh data feeds into the lake, and our intelligence adapts based on the feeds. In other words, if I get a risk posture for you yesterday, Monday, and I rerun it on Wednesday, and there was something that happened on Tuesday, I'll see a different risk posture on Wednesday. It's that dynamic. And so at the end of the day, we are an OEM player. So our business is entirely based on API access to the data. But what makes us valuable is our data.
Awesome. I have last two questions, and they're general about the industry, right? Overall, not about Constella or the CISO. I want to talk about for hundreds and thousands of cybersecurity practitioners watching this, people working in SOCs, doing threat analysis, security operations. Your prediction says that a lot of work will be automated in 2026, right? Where should they focus their skills on to be relevant, and what skills will matter as we go forward?
Well, somebody has to master the automation. So if you focus on mastering the automation, if you focus on mastering the actual driving forces of whatever AI technology comes into your environment, almost becoming more of an AI security engineer than a security engineer, for instance, I think you'll be fine. Because at the end of the day, I don't care what the AI is. Some human still wrote that algorithm, and some human has to manage it. And, there's always going to be a human in the loop, or at least I hope there will be. So I think focusing your efforts on those areas where you can facilitate the use of AI technology to scale your operations at a much, larger, within a much larger scope, I think that makes sense. I also think that there will always be niche environmental factors that you can still focus on, where, let's face it, you look at some of the stuff that AI generates, it's not perfect. You still need a human to go in and validate what is being said. And, if the actions are automated, that needs constant revision from a human. I think there's still plenty of opportunities for especially younger cybersecurity analysts and engineers to take a step back, look at where AI is impacting, and then figure out how you can impact the AI that's impacting your operation. That, to me, strategically. And by the way, that's one of my sons is in cybersecurity. This is the exact advice I give my own son.
Really appreciate it. My last question is on overall state of this industry, overall cybersecurity and the security industry. You have played three different roles, right? Right from the DEA days to coming into the cybersecurity and being yourself a CISO, and then now running a company that defends them or defends corporations, right? I want to know one thing that scares you at night, that is going to come. And then one hope that lets you sleep. Like, what's the fight against it, if you can share?
I think the hope is that people continuously keep stepping up. With all my, seemingly judgmental statements about CISOs and all that, I still believe that the folks that come into that role do genuinely want to protect the organization they work for. I think that they genuinely want to do the right thing. And I think as long as that intent is still there, we have a hope of winning, or at least catching up. I mean, let me not say winning. And so I'm hopeful that the industry continues on a good, positive trajectory. I get disheartened sometimes when I see the lack of skill that some of these folks have. But then again, I come from a world where in our original days, you had to have the skill and be the executive. Now everybody just wants to be the executive. So we need to figure out how to bridge that executive to capabilities gap, because it exists. But again, like I said, I'm hopeful because if the intent is there, I'm hopeful. What scares me is that bridge I just spoke about doesn't get created quick enough. And the problems that we've encountered, if you saw the rate of breaches that we find at Constella, you wouldn't sleep at night. You wouldn't sleep at night. And here's the thing, most of those breaches don't even make it into the mainstream media. And here's another little known fact, which I always crack up when I go on LinkedIn and some CISOs like, oh my God, 490,000 passwords breached. I live inside that world. here's what he doesn't know.
Mm.
That breach happened 6 months ago. And for 6 months, the bad people have been monetizing that breach and then decided to let you know about it. That's what they don't know. And I have proof. I have the date we found a breach, and then the date all the big CISOs start making noise about it. The thing is, they don't live in that world. They live up in the nosebleed section, so they don't realize the reality. And the reality is that breach was monetized for months before you even knew about it. That, I won't say scares me, but that disconnect between what that CISO thought was reality and what I see as reality, that is kind of scary.
Yeah, I think I really hope from this conversation, if we can take anything, is to bridge that gap faster of stepping up. And thank you for your time and such candid opinion, Andres. And for a lot of people watching this, detail for Andres as well as Constella Intelligence is in the show notes. And if it changed how you think about 2026 and about defending against artificial adversaries, about what security actually requires now in 2026 and 27, that's how we do it. And thank you, Andres, for your time. And thank you for watching CXO Spotlight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.